I wasn't looking to start a fight that morning. I just wanted to pay my rent, grab a coffee, and get back to the busted water heater waiting for me in someone's basement. But fate, or whatever you want to call it, had other plans. Funny how ordinary Thursdays sometimes don't stay ordinary. It was just past 9 when I stepped through the glass doors of Central First Bank on Maple and 6th. The place still smelled like new carpet and printer toner, even though I'd been coming in here every month since I moved back to Arbor Falls. I tugged my cap lower out of habit, the one with the faded emblem of the 101st Airborne. Old thing had followed me from Afghanistan to Montana and now to Michigan. I guess I still carried myself like a soldier. It's not something you can just turn off, straight back, eye scanning, body always halfway braced for something. Civilian life's easier in a lot of ways, sure. But it doesn't soften that inner coil that always waits to spring. The line at the teller's counter was short. 2 people ahead of me, a young mom juggling a stroller and a dude in a suit probably rushing to close a deal or ruin someone's credit score. That's when I saw her, off to the side at the customer service desk. A woman well into her 70s, silver hair pulled into a bun, cardigan sleeves pushed back to her elbows, hands trembling just enough to notice. Something about the way she stood caught my eye. She wasn't just asking questions, she was defending something. I've seen that look before. My mama wore it every time the world tried to trample over her. "Ma'am, I've told you already," the bank clerk snapped, her voice sharp like she was late for a latte. "There's nothing in our system that says your husband's account is exempt from fees. But the letter from the Veterans Office says." "Our system," the clerk cut in, "doesn't recognize that letter. There's nothing I can do." Now, I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose, but the bank's acoustics were doing most of the work. The woman, her name I didn't know yet, pressed her lips together, clearly trying to stay dignified. That quiet kind of dignity that never asks for pity. That's the kind that hits me hardest. Behind me, a guy maybe 20-something let out this theatrical sigh. "Some people don't know how to read a room," he muttered. "We all got places to be." I turned my head slightly. He wore earbuds, a backward cap, and the kind of smugness that only comes from never being told no by life. The woman asked for a manager. Politely. Firmly. The clerk scoffed. "He's unavailable. You'll need to come back with the correct paperwork. Maybe next time bring someone who understands our policies." "Come on, Grandma," the young man behind me called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We don't got all day." Something snapped in me. I didn't plan it. I didn't weigh it. My boots just moved. I stepped out of line, walked right over to that desk, and placed my hand gently on the woman's shoulder. The clerk blinked at me, startled. "Sir, this doesn't concern." "It does," I said, quiet but firm. "It concerns all of us." I looked around. People were avoiding eye contact now. You'd think I'd pulled a fire alarm. No one wanted to be involved, but nobody was walking out either. Funny how people act like injustice is contagious. "I'm happy to wait while you look again," I continued. "But this lady deserves to be heard, not dismissed." The clerk's face pinched up. "Our system doesn't lie, and I don't have time to." "She has a letter from the VA," I said. "And unless your system outranks the Department of Defense, maybe you ought to take another look." That's when she spoke, softly, with a touch of that old Southern grace that makes you sit up straighter. "My name's Evelyn Rose Carter," she said, offering her hand. "Widow of Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Carter, 2nd Armored Cavalry. He died in Ramadi." I took her hand. Firm grip. Steady eyes. "Ben Carter? I know the name. My CO back in '09 served under him. Said he was the kind of officer who shared the cold meals and the shell fire with his men." Her smile warmed slightly. "That was my Ben. We stood together, just 2 strangers connected by a uniform and a principle. The clerk didn't know what to do with us. You could see her squirming under the weight of our stillness. Then the guy in the suit from the line called out, "Oh great, a hero complex. Look, man, she's old. Mistakes happen. Let her go and move on." But I wasn't moving. Not this time. And that, my friend, is how a quiet Thursday at Central first turned into something nobody there would forget. The bank wasn't built for tension, but right then you could have cut the air with a paperclip. Eyes darted from phone screens to faces, unsure of which way the wind was blowing. I stood there beside Mrs. Carter, and if I'm being honest, I wasn't entirely sure what I planned to do next. The clerk, name tag, said Tanya, shifted behind the desk like she was preparing for either an apology or a call to security. Maybe both. "You need to return to your place in line, sir." She tried again, voice clipped. "You're disrupting." "I'm standing," I interrupted calmly. "That's all. Just standing." A low voice chimed in from the side. Is there a problem here? It was the security guard, mid-50s, probably former military himself. You can always tell. The posture, the haircut, the lingering stare that scans you for threat, then decency. No problem at all, I said, without looking away from Tanya. Just a customer waiting while another customer gets treated like she matters. Mrs. Carter nudged me gently. Son, I appreciate you standing here, but I've been handling this kind of thing a long time. You don't have to fight my battles. She said it soft, like a lullaby wrapped in steel. With all due respect, ma'am, I replied, lowering my voice to match hers. Sometimes, it's not about whether you can. It's about whether you should have to. That's when Tanya exhaled hard through her nose and said, Look, if the system didn't register her veteran exemption, then it's not valid. We don't just override policy because someone shows up with a letter. Now, I'd seen my share of bureaucracy, and I've worked enough supply lines in the desert to know that systems are only as strong as the people willing to question them. Let me see the letter, I asked Mrs. Carter. She unfolded it carefully, like it meant something, which it did. A VA form with the insignia right at the top, stating clearly her account was categorized under military survivor benefits. No ambiguity. No fine print. This document's correct, I told Tanya. Your bank handled this 3 months ago. Looks like it happened again. You need to escalate this to someone who understands policy. Tanya didn't appreciate the suggestion. Our system is the final authority. No, I said a little firmer. Your system is a tool. This woman is the authority on her life. Then came the moment I should have expected. A man in a suit, clean shave, polished shoes, Bluetooth earpiece, stepped out of an office in the back. What's going on out here? Tanya straightened like she'd been caught writing love notes during Sunday service. This gentleman's interfering with customer services, Mr. Braxton. The manager, Braxton, apparently, looked me up and down. His gaze snagged briefly on my boots, the faded army patch on my sleeve. You're creating a scene, sir. You need to return to the line or leave the premises. I turned toward him, slow and deliberate. What I'm doing, I said, is standing beside a military widow who deserves better than being brushed aside. He gave a tight, performative smile. Sir, this bank serves many veterans. We treat everyone equally. No, you don't, I replied. You treat everyone according to policy. That's not the same thing. I could feel it now, the shift in the room. The watching. The weighing. Someone near the front of the line muttered, Just let the old lady talk to the manager already. Another voice added, Yeah, this is ridiculous. She has a letter. Even Tanya seemed surprised. People who usually say nothing were starting to stir. Braxton must have sensed it too. He held up a hand like a referee about to issue a warning. All right, he said. Miss Carter, we'll make an appointment for later today with our senior compliance officer. Right now, I need you both to step aside or I'll have to escalate this. Mrs. Carter held her chin high. I've waited long enough. I'm not leaving until someone does their job. That's when the kid behind me, the smug one, groaned again. This is nuts. All this for some old bat's pension. And that, my friend, was the last straw. Before I could speak, Mrs. Carter turned toward him. My husband, she said gently, was awarded the Bronze Star for saving 12 men in Ramadi. He died with a radio in his hand, calling in medevac for others while bleeding out. I've buried a flag. I've raised 2 sons. And I've never once asked this country for more than what we were promised. So maybe, just maybe, a little patience isn't too much to ask. Silence. You could have heard the bank clock tick. Then, without warning, the front doors opened, and something happened that I still think about often. 4 people walked in. 3 men, 1 woman, all in army dress uniforms. Rows of ribbons, polished shoes, a crisp presence that shifted the entire air in the room. The man leading them had stars on his shoulders. A general. The room went still in that eerie way silence sometimes slides in uninvited, heavy as fog. Nobody moved, not even the security guard. The sound of those dress shoes clicking against the tile echoed across the lobby like a slow drumbeat. The general stepped forward, tall, broad, mid-60s with silver hair and a face that looked carved from granite. The ribbons on his chest told a longer story than words ever could. His eyes were sharp, alert, and when they locked onto Mrs. Carter, something in his expression softened. Deeply. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, he said, with the kind of warmth that only comes from reverence. We've been looking for you. Mrs. Carter blinked in surprise. General Hawthorne? He smiled and nodded. It's been a long time. General Richard Hawthorne, commander of the Midwestern Military District. I recognized him the second he walked in. I'd only seen him once before, back in Kandahar, but there was no mistaking the man. He was the kind of leader you didn't forget. He stepped in and did something that I think left the whole room reeling. He hugged her. Not a polite handshake or a nod. A hug. A genuine, respectful embrace, like a soldier greeting family. I'm so sorry for the delay, he said quietly. Traffic was heavier than expected. Manager Braxton practically tripped over himself stepping forward. General Hawthorne, sir, this is a surprise. Welcome you to Central First Bank. How may we help you today? The general didn't even look at him. He turned to Evelyn and said, Is everything all right here? She gave a small shake of her head, eyes glassy but dignified. Just a little confusion with the account. They say Ben's pension status doesn't qualify anymore. The general looked at Tanya, then Braxton, then me. His jaw tensed, but his voice stayed composed. Allow me to clarify something. And with that, he turned to the entire bank, customers, staff, even the security guard frozen by the door. You're looking at a woman who has done more for this country and for its soldiers than most will ever know. He motioned behind him. One of the officers stepped forward, handing him a folder. For 37 years, the general continued, Evelyn Carter served this nation not only as the wife of a commanding officer, but as a cornerstone of military family life. She founded family support programs, counseled young spouses during deployments, and helped establish protocols that are still in use at military bases across this country. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Her husband, Colonel Benjamin Carter, died in Ramadi saving his men from an ambush. He was awarded the Silver Star posthumously. His pension was assigned a special exemption status, personally authorized by the Secretary of Defense. Braxton paled like a man who just realized he bid against the house. General Hawthorne opened the folder and held it up. This is the letter in question. It's real. It's binding. And it's protected under federal statute. Tanya took a shaky step back. I didn't know. No, the general replied, voice clipped. You didn't ask. That's when the youngest of the officers stepped forward, clean-shaven, probably not more than 30, and added, the account contains benefits for families of fallen service members. The error wasn't hers. It was yours. Braxton cleared his throat, his voice shriveled to a whisper. We'll correct this immediately, of course. That's a start, the general said. But it's not enough. Another officer opened a case and removed a framed certificate, military seal, gold leaf, and Evelyn's name printed boldly in the center. This was supposed to be presented at today's memorial ceremony, the general said, but I think it means more to give it here, where it might teach something. He turned to Mrs. Carter. On behalf of the U.S. Army and every soldier whose family you helped hold together, we thank you. For your strength, for your grace, and for never asking for anything in return. The crowd didn't erupt, didn't cheer. It was too stunned, too humbled. But I'll tell you what I did see, eyes lowering. People shifting on their feet. Tanya biting her lip, cheeks red. The young punk from earlier? He was staring at the floor like it might swallow him whole. The general looked around one last time. Let me say this as plainly as I can. This woman should never have been made to stand here and explain herself. He turned to me then, and his expression changed, appreciation clear as day. And you, he said. Thank you for standing with her when it counted. I nodded. Couldn't find my voice. Just swallowed hard and said, it was the right thing. Funny how few people do the right thing when it's inconvenient, he said, with the hint of a smile. Then he turned to Evelyn. Come on, ma'am. Let's get you where you really belong. He offered her his arm. She hesitated, then took it with grace. As they turned toward the door, he paused and looked back over his shoulder at Braxton. Expect a call from my office. We'll be auditing every veteran account in this branch starting today. They walked out in silence, just the 4 officers and one silver-haired woman whose quiet strength had spoken louder than any order I'd ever followed. And just like that, the bank slowly started breathing again. I didn't leave the bank right away. I guess I stood there longer than I meant to, just letting it sink in. What had just happened wasn't some viral video moment or Hollywood ending. It was quieter than that. Real. Human. It left me standing in the middle of a lobby with a check still in my pocket and a lump in my throat I hadn't asked for. The crowd dispersed in waves. Some folks whispered as they headed out, others just kept their heads down, suddenly very interested in their phones or shoes. Tanya slunk away behind the counter, eyes glossy, avoiding every stare. Braxton had vanished. Can't say I was surprised. Guys like him always seem to remember urgent meetings when accountability shows up in a uniform. I finally stepped back in line to pay my rent check. The teller who called me up didn't make eye contact until halfway through the transaction. Young man, probably knew. You could see the embarrassment crawling behind his polite expression. Sir, he said, sliding my receipt across the counter. Thank you for your service. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I was still thinking about Evelyn Carter. About how many women like her sit across desks like this one every week, hoping somebody, anybody, will do more than just click a keyboard and shrug. As I walked out into the morning light, the air had changed. Cleaner, somehow. Like the city itself had taken a breath, but the moment didn't feel finished. I made it halfway to my truck when a voice called after me. I turned. It was the general. He stood beside the black government SUV, one hand resting on the door, the other gesturing toward me. Mister, he began. Tyler, I said. Tyler Nash. Specialist Nash? He asked, head tilting. Retired, I replied. 101st Airborne. Kandahar. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. I thought I recognized the patch. Sergeant Webb used to tell stories about you. Said you could fix a satellite radio with a paperclip and a stick of gum. I chuckled. I remember Webb. He once tried to dry his boots in a microwave. Blew out the generator. The general laughed, an honest one. Then he got serious. Tyler, I'd like you to come with us. I blinked. Sir, we're headed to the Carter Memorial Ceremony. It's just across town. Small gathering. Closed to the public. But Evelyn asked if you could be there. Said it wouldn't feel right otherwise. I didn't even hesitate. Yes, sir. I climbed into the SUV, squeezed between a lieutenant and a captain whose name I never caught. We rode in silence mostly, except for the general giving the occasional update on a secure line. It felt like being back on patrol, except instead of a desert, we were driving past cafes and corner stores, and instead of prepping for an op, we were heading to honor someone who lived her life on the quiet front lines, where battles didn't come with medals but mattered just as much. The venue was a small brick chapel inside a military support complex. Looked plain from the outside, but inside, there was light streaming through stained glass and rows of folding chairs filling up fast with dress uniforms, service ribbons, and a few civilians who'd clearly earned their seats. At the front of the room, beneath a simple banner that read, "For those who never stopped serving," was a display, Colonel Benjamin Carter's medals, a framed photo of him in uniform, and, at the center, a folded flag in a triangular case, flanked by two small candles. Evelyn stood nearby, chatting with a woman I recognized from VA Outreach, Ms. Jacoby, I think her name was. She saw me enter, smiled that same steel-line smile, and waved me over. Tyler, she said softly, you didn't have to come. With all due respect, I replied, I don't think I had a choice. She laughed gently. Then would have liked you. We sat side by side in the second row as the ceremony began. It was simple. No pomp. No 21-gun salute. Just words, real ones. The general gave the opening remarks. Then a few others spoke. An old friend of Ben's, a young woman from the Military Family Services program Evelyn had helped build, and finally, a soldier in his early 30s who'd been part of a squad Ben had once mentored. When it was over, they unveiled a plaque to be mounted at the center's front entrance. It read, in honor of Colonel Benjamin Carter and Evelyn Rose Carter, for service, sacrifice, and the bonds that endure. As we were leaving, the general pulled me aside. You've got good instincts, Nash, he said. Not everyone stands up when it's inconvenient. I shrugged. Didn't feel like a choice. Just felt like what needed to happen. That's the kind of man we need more of, he said. Which brings me to a proposal. That's when he handed me a business card, black, heavy stock, embossed with an eagle and the words Community Veteran Outreach, Civilian Advisor Program. You interested in helping us close the gap between military and civilian life? He asked. You speak both languages. Might be good to have you on the bridge. I stared at the card. Thought about the busted water heater waiting back at a client's place. Then thought about Evelyn. About standing still when everyone else turns away. I looked up. I'm interested. I didn't say yes right away. I tucked the card in my back pocket, shook the general's hand, and told him I'd think it over. Truth was, I needed time. My life wasn't exactly flashy. I fixed pipes, ate frozen dinners, and listened to baseball on an old radio, but it was steady, predictable. And after years of sand, sweat, and silence, predictability had become my comfort zone. Still, that night I couldn't sleep. I lay on my back in the apartment I'd rented since coming back to Arbor Falls. The radiator ticked like a stubborn metronome. Outside, the streetlight flickered like it always did, a tiny pulse in the dark. And all I could think about was Evelyn Carter. How many times had she walked into a place like that bank, head high, heart heavy, only to be brushed aside? How many more Evelyns were out there? That card burned like a match in my pocket. The next morning, I called the number. A week later, I started part-time with the Civilian Advisor Program. Just a few days a week at first, helping out with transition seminars, paperwork clinics, and job fairs for recently discharged vets. Stuff I wish I'd had when I got out. It felt strange at first, like putting on a uniform you'd outgrown. But then, something clicked. I wasn't patching holes in drywall anymore. I was patching holes in people's lives. I met guys who looked just like I had 2 years ago, fresh out, lost in a sea of acronyms and government forms. Some of them couldn't figure out how to apply for housing. Others didn't even know they qualified for education grants. And a few, too many, just needed someone to talk to. Someone who didn't look at them like they were a broken toy left behind after the parade ended. That's where I came in. Not as a counselor or therapist, just a guy who'd been there. I remember one afternoon, about a month into the job, when I sat across from a Marine corporal named Deshawn. He'd served 2 tours in Syria and now couldn't figure out why the VA kept denying his claim for shoulder surgery. They said I needed more documentation, he muttered, slumped in the plastic chair like a kid waiting for detention. But I don't know what the hell that even means. I walked him through the process, line by line, then helped him draft the appeal. By the time we were done, he looked at me and said, "You ever think about how dumb it is that you need a translator just to survive after serving your country?" I nodded. Every damn day. Over time, my part-time gig became full-time, then permanent. I helped create a resource packet with step-by-step instructions for common vet challenges, housing, healthcare, mental health, family services. We called it the Bridge Guide. The general liked it so much, he had it printed and distributed to 12 other outreach centers across the region. One afternoon, while stapling pages in the rec room, I looked up to see a familiar face. Evelyn Carter. She stood in the doorway with a tin of cookies in one hand and a smile in the other. "I thought your office could use something sweet," she said, lifting the tin slightly. I grinned. "Well, that depends. Are these cookies or stealth recruiting tools?" "A little of both," she said, stepping inside. It became a ritual after that. Every couple of weeks, Evelyn would stop by the office, always with something home-baked, always with a story, and always with that quiet dignity of someone who didn't care about impressing anyone but still impressed everyone. She talked about Ben sometimes. About the early days when soldiers were just boys in mud-covered boots and base housing was a leaky trailer with a stubborn stove. She told me how she'd once stood up to a major who tried to cancel the family grief support group she'd organized. "Ben said I made more enemies on base than he ever did on deployment," she laughed. "But they respected me." I believed it. One day, I walked her out to her car, and she paused before getting in. "You know, Tyler," she said, adjusting her scarf, "that day in the bank? I didn't expect anyone to stand with me. I've gotten used to being invisible." "You shouldn't have to be," I said. She reached into her purse and handed me a small, worn photograph. It was black and white, faded at the edges. A young Ben Carter stood in uniform, smiling beside her. They looked invincible. "He used to say," she whispered, "don't wait for a better world. Be the reason it gets better." I kept that picture on my desk from then on, right next to my worn cap and the flag that had once hung in my father's garage before he passed. Time passed. Our program expanded. We hired more advisors, started offering free classes on resume building, interview prep, and small business planning for veterans. I led a workshop once called "How to Fix a Sink and Your Sense of Purpose." Nobody laughed at the title, but they all showed up. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from the general. "Tyler," he said, "you got a minute?" "Always. There's something coming up. Something big. I think you ought to be part of it." The call from General Hawthorne wasn't long. "There's going to be a memorial," he said. "Not just for Ben Carter. For all the military families that stood behind the scenes." He paused. "We'd like you to speak." I froze. "Me? I'm no keynote speaker, sir. You're a soldier. A son. A civilian now helping others stand tall. You're exactly the voice we need." I told him I'd think about it. But if I'm honest, I knew the answer the moment he asked. 3 weeks later, I found myself standing backstage at the State Veterans Hall in Lansing, Michigan. The place was packed, folding chairs full of families, former service members, volunteers, Gold Star parents. They were there for the unveiling of a new memorial wall, etched names not just of soldiers, but of spouses, counselors, medics, and advocates. Evelyn Carter's name was right there in the center. I stood behind the curtain with shaking hands and a knot in my throat that wouldn't budge. Evelyn was sitting front row, her hair pinned neatly, hands folded in her lap. She'd worn a brooch shaped like a lily. She caught my eye and nodded once. No words, just that steady kind of encouragement that says, "You've got this, even if you don't think you do." My name was called. I stepped up to the podium, took a breath, and began. "I didn't come here today as a hero," I said. "I'm not. I came as a guy who stood in a bank line and saw something wrong and chose not to look away. That was the truth. No medals, no rank. Just a moment that had asked me, are you going to stand or stay silent?" I spoke about Evelyn. About that day in the bank. About the lessons we keep learning long after we've hung up the uniform. Courage, I said, isn't always charging a hill. Sometimes it's standing still when someone's being dismissed. It's refusing to step aside when someone says, "You're not worth the time." The hall stayed silent. I spotted a young woman in uniform wiping her eyes. A man with a prosthetic leg nodding slowly. I ended with a quote from Ben Carter, passed down through Evelyn. "One person standing for what's right is worth 100 standing for nothing." Then I stepped down. Not to applause, though there was some, but to something better. A sense of connection, of understanding. Evelyn met me at the edge of the stage. "You spoke like a soldier," she said. "I was trying to speak like a man," I replied. Same thing, when done right. We smiled. And the moment passed, but not the meaning. After the memorial, things moved fast. The speech made its way online. Someone had filmed it. A local paper ran a piece. Then a national one. Suddenly, I was getting emails from veterans across the country. People I'd never met writing things like, "You said what I couldn't," or "Thanks for standing up for folks like us." Even Braxton, the bank manager from that day, reached out. He asked if we could meet. We sat across from each other at a coffee shop downtown. He looked tired. Different. No tie. No mask of smug professionalism. "I didn't sleep much after that day," he admitted. "I realized I've spent years hiding behind policy instead of helping people." He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was offering something else. "I want to help," he said. "Financial literacy, banking systems, stuff most vets never get taught. If there's a way I can use what I know, let me." So I brought him into the outreach center. He started with a workshop called Banking After the Barracks. It filled up in a day. Evelyn showed up with cookies. "People can change," she whispered to me, "if you give them a reason to." She wasn't wrong. And neither was the general, who called again to say the program was expanding new hires, new branches. He wanted my input. Wanted me to lead training for the next wave of civilian advisors. Me. The plumber who stepped out of a line. I wasn't sure I was the right guy. But then I thought of something Evelyn once said. Real leadership doesn't shout. It stands still until someone else finds their feet. So I stood still. And I stayed. It's funny how a single moment, just seconds long, can ripple through lives like a stone thrown into still water. That bank incident? I thought it would blow over. Instead, it became the foundation for something bigger. One of the officers who had come with General Hawthorne that day, Captain Ruiz, reached out a few months later. Said he was starting a peer support network for active duty soldiers preparing to re-enter civilian life. He asked me to help design part of the curriculum. We called it the Second Landing. No lectures. Just roundtable sessions where soldiers could talk about things most people didn't understand, like how it feels to lose your mission when the uniform comes off, or how hard it is to ask for help when you've always been the one giving it. Evelyn was our guest speaker at the first meeting. She spoke for 15 minutes. No flash, no slideshow. Just stories. Honest ones. She talked about standing in the commissary line, 27 and alone, with 2 kids under 5 and a check that barely covered milk. About the fear that hits when you realize no one's coming home. About grace and grit, and how sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is ask a question twice when the first answer doesn't feel right. When she finished, the room was still. One young sergeant said, "I wish my mom could have heard you." And I saw Evelyn's eyes fill, just a little. Afterward, she sat beside me and said, "You're helping build something real." "I'm just holding the bricks," I said. "You laid the first row." She smiled, and I swear, in that moment, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were making a dent in a wall that had stood too long between 2 worlds. That winter, Evelyn started visiting the center more often. She'd sit with the younger vets, listen to their stories like each one was sacred. She didn't talk much unless asked, But when she did, people leaned in. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was part of the place. One afternoon, she brought in a small wooden box, set it on my desk without saying a word. Inside was Ben's bronze star. "I want you to have it," she said. I stared at her, stunned. "Evelyn, I can't. You stood when it mattered," she interrupted, her voice firm but kind. "Ben would have given this to someone like you. Someone who didn't need a battlefield to be brave." I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "Thank you." She nodded, then quietly added, "And if you don't put it up on that wall, I'm taking it back." So I did. Hung it right next to the photo of her and Ben, and the small plaque engraved with the quote she always carried. "One person standing for what's right is worth 100 standing for nothing." That wall became something of a landmark. People would stop and stare. Some would cry. Some would smile. One teenager, a new recruit waiting to ship out, looked at it and said, "I want to be like him." I said, "Then start now. Don't wait for a uniform." That spring, we held a reunion at the center. A gathering of everyone who'd come through our doors over the past year. Some had jobs now. Some had families. All had stories. We set up a table just for Evelyn, her cookies, of course, but also a journal where people could write notes to her. By the end of the night, it was full. And that's when I realized something. She hadn't just impacted lives. She'd changed them. Evelyn passed away quietly the following fall. There was no big announcement, no headlines. Just a phone call from her niece letting me know she'd slipped away in her sleep, peaceful, at home, with Ben's photo beside her bed and a handwritten note tucked underneath that simply read, "Still standing." Her funeral was held at the small chapel on base, the same one where the memorial ceremony had taken place. The pews were full, veterans from every branch, family she'd helped, even a few bankers from Central First. General Hawthorne delivered the eulogy. "She never wore a uniform," he said, "but she served this country in ways few ever could. And when the time came, she taught us all how to stand." After the service, I stood near the steps of the chapel, watching the guests filter out. A breeze rustled the flags at half-mast, and for a moment, I felt a quiet ache, not sharp, not overwhelming. Just a kind of hollow gratitude for the space she'd left behind. Back at the Outreach Center, we made a change. We renamed it the Evelyn Carter Veterans Transition Center. We held a small ceremony, nothing fancy. A new sign. A few words. But when we unveiled the plaque on the wall, I read something I'd written weeks earlier, not knowing I'd read it aloud that day. "This center stands not just because one woman believed in veterans, but because she believed in what comes after the uniform. That dignity matters. That no one should face the world alone. That sometimes the most important battles are fought in silence. And the greatest courage is found in stillness." I looked out at the crowd, Deshawn, Tanya from the bank, even Braxton. And standing off to the side, arms folded, eyes glinting with something quiet and proud, was General Hawthorne. Later that evening, alone in my office, I sat beneath the bronze star in the old photo of Evelyn and Ben. I opened the journal we'd started for her and flipped to the last page. One of the new recruits had written, "I never met you, but I carry you with me. You make me want to be better. You remind me to stand tall. Thank you, Mrs. Carter." I closed the book. That's what legacy is, I think. Not a statue or a medal or a speech. It's the feeling someone leaves behind in others. The space they carve into your heart and your habits. The voice that reminds you, when the easy thing is to look away, to stay still instead. If I learned anything from Evelyn, it's this. You don't need a battlefield to be brave. You just need a moment and the courage to stand in it. So here's my promise to her, and to anyone who's ever felt dismissed, unseen, or unheard. I will keep standing. I will stand for what's right, even when I'm alone, especially then. And maybe, just maybe, when someone else is wondering if they should step forward too, they'll see me there and choose to join me. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not move. Sometimes standing still means standing tallest.